Thanks, Lisa. Next up, we have two scholars with close ties to Texas. We have Logan Molyneux, who's one of your very own UT journalism scholars, and he's presenting a paper he co-authored with Avery Holton, who's one of your alums. Their paper's about the kind of controversial topic about journalists and branding, sort of self-branding by journalists, in their case, health journalists. So, Logan.
Thank you. Houston? Oh, okay, have a bad feeling about this mission. Sorry, I watched Gravity last night, and I really liked it. So she's right. I'm Logan Molyneux, and I'm here representing Avery Holton, who's at the University of Utah right now, or actually on his way back to the University of Utah right now. Our research began, as much research does, with a hunch. We suspected that creating a personal brand is becoming a part of journalist's job, and not just a part, but an important part of journalist's job. This hunch came from a study that I had done of what journalists retweet. So I went through and captured a huge pile of tweets that journalists had sent out during the 2012 presidential political conventions and analyzed what journalists retweeted. And a substantial portion of their retweets were things that other people had said about them. For example, that's right. So let's pretend that I'm the journalist, and you all are tweeting about my work here at this conference. So you might tweet some commentary about me and my presentation here. And if I were acting like the journalist that I had studied, then I might retweet some of those comments, such as these. Journalists retweeted people who pointed out their work. They were saying that this journalist is going to appear, or that this new story was up. They would retweet praise that they received, but they also opened their hate mail in public. So we got to thinking, what prompts a journalist to take the time to retweet praise and even the hate mail they're receiving? In our minds, this was an evidence of an effort to craft a public image, an effort to say, hey, this is who I am. So this is only interesting because for most journalists, the organization that they work for is more famous than they are. There's a few journalists who break this mold and they can say, hey, I'm Anderson Cooper, and everybody immediately knows who they are. But for most people, they introduce themselves by saying, hi, I'm so-and-so, for a reporter for the Washington Post, right? So we set out to do a series of interviews with reporters to find out how much branding really is a part of their work, and how widely are journalists branding themselves. Do they do it consciously, purposefully? How important is it to them, and what motivates them to create a personal brand? We decided to center on health journalists because sometimes these journalists in specialty areas tend to innovate more quickly, and they're more closely tied to their beats, which was what we thought would drive a journalist to do branding in the first place. So what they told us is, yes, personal branding is an important part of their everyday jobs, and in fact, all 21 journalists we interviewed said that they were familiar with personal branding, and that they were surprised at how quickly it had become important to them. They said they realized that some of the responsibility to reach out to their audiences and sell their work falls to them, the journalists. In fact, they said it's their best shot to remain relevant. One journalist said, maybe it's not something you learn in school or pick up in the field, but you sure better get with it, and fast. Interestingly, the pressure to do branding is coming from their colleagues a lot of times and not from their supervisors, so there really isn't a unified approach to it. Actually, journalists told us that it seems like branding is something everyone is doing, but that nobody really knows how to do. And that's not entirely true. They did say they're getting almost no guidance from management about what to do, but in that void, they're finding room to experiment. For example, this first journalist here that I've quoted said he started giving short webinars related to his beat, and he called it a live lecture series, and said it started out small, but that now he's constantly engaged in conversations with his audience. Journalists also told us that they share and comment on other journalists' work and even open up about their jobs and their personal lives, and they find that their audiences value transparency about themselves and about their jobs. So they weren't afraid to talk about how they got a story or who they couldn't talk to, or even link to other news stories on their beat written by other journalists. As one journalist said, it lets my readers know that I actually care enough to put good news ahead of my own ego. A final important theme is that journalists said branding for them is about managing their own image and not about promoting the organizations that they work for. They work to be billboards for themselves, as this journalist said. And most of this happens on social media. Their goal is to connect with their audience and show them that they know what they're talking about to really establish their authority on their beat. So there's probably some of you out there crossing your arms and going, well, of course journalists want to be recognized. Or, great, finally journalists are engaging with their audiences. But there's at least a couple of important challenges and implications that came up during our interviews. The first one is that when journalists begin grooming a public image, is it possible that they become more concerned with that image than with their actual work? We're really fond of saying that journalists work in the public interest, but is it possible that even the audience could have too much influence on them? Jay Rosen was mentioning this a little bit this morning when he was talking about this careful relationship about engaging the audience, but also maintaining your independence. For example, might I skip a story if I know my constituents wouldn't love it? Would I be too willing to follow their news judgment instead of my own? Anyway, there's some of these questions surrounding how you maintain your independence while you're also trying to form positive relationships with your audience. That's a balance that journalists will have to strike. Second, and this is a disappointment because in the original presentation I had the oval moving, but you'll have to imagine. Second, we see a subtle power shift occurring in journalism. As I said in the beginning, it used to be that news organizations held much of the influence, and mostly that was because they controlled the news product. The Washington Post is a thing, and it's a powerful brand, right? But now, journalists are wanting to take more control of their own future rather than relying on their organizations. And partly that's because their organizations have failed them in many ways in this digital age. But also because they have a new way to reach their audiences. With social media, they can connect directly to others and form relationships with their audiences. That is, they can form a personal brand, and they're jumping at the chance. Organizations will have to make a case for their relevance. I mean, maybe journalists would all be better off as freelancers, right? Probably not, because there's some First Amendment fights and some other resources that can only be brought to bear by a large organization. So it's a fine line again between encouraging positive outreach that branding offers while not letting journalists run away with the audience. So if organizations can find that balance, then I think it's possible that branding can bring about positive change as journalists engage with their audiences and own their beats. Thank you.